you very much for kind introduction, Professors Taylor and Yamada. Today, hold on. I am going to talk about the Meiji University's expedition to Alaska in 1960. Today, I have to, confess all sorts of embarrassing things. I was hired by Meiji in April 1999. And I didn't have knowledge about this. How did I learn about this? In 1914, in the school of 1914, our university got a relatively huge grant from the national government of Japan. And as a part of the work, my senior colleagues, and I created digital database of unpublished materials of Professors Oka Masao, cultural anthropologist in the early 1960s at Meiji, and Sugihara Sosuke, archaeologist who founded the archaeology program at the Meiji University, and Professor Inoue Mitsuhara, University of Tokyo, historian. He was a mentor of Meiji University Professor of Ancient History then. And below is site. And Meiji University's expedition to Alaska was, I think, originally planned or under the direction of Professor Oka Masao, who was a professor of cultural anthropology at Meiji since 1960. He was a leading cultural anthropologist of 20th century Japan. He did a doctoral study at the University of Vienna in the early 1930s. And at that time, actually, he was a classmate with Clyde Clutcombe, who later became professor and the chairman of anthropology department at Harvard. Oka majored in sociology at the Tokyo Imperial University in the early 1920s, and he was the section head of the National Institute of Ethnology during the Second World War, and appointed to be a professor of cultural anthropology at the Tokyo Metropolitan University in 1951 and moved to Meiji in 1960. But thing is that before his move to Meiji, he already started to prepare for this interdisciplinary expedition to Alaska. So cultural ethnology team was headed by Oka Masao, and the archaeology team was headed by archaeologist Sugihara Sosuke. He contributed to many different aspects of Japanese archaeology, like he played the major role in founding the Japanese Archaeological Association in 1948. And he, what else? He was appointed to be an associate professor of Japanese history at Meiji in 1948 and founded undergraduate and graduate programs in archaeology independent from the Japanese history department in 1950 at the Meiji University for the first time among private universities in Japan. The first independent archaeology program was established at the Kyoto Imperial University in 1916, and then the second, University of Tokyo in 1948, the third, actually the first among private universities at Meiji. And he was an amateur archaeologist in the 1930s, and he studied at Tokyo University of Foreign Cultures, French major, Sophia University, German major, and then Meiji University from 1941 to 43, and worked for the Ministry of Education and Culture shortly after the Second World War. And he participated in excavations of the Toro site, Shizuoka Prefecture from 1947 to 1950, where prehistoric rice paddies were discovered for the first time in Japan. He also conducted excavations of the Iwajuku site, Gunma Prefecture, that's 80 miles northwest of Tokyo in 1950, where Paleolithic culture was discovered for the first time in Japan. he was very also exceptional among Japanese archaeologists, I would say, because he was very international. He was actually when before the Second World War, it was coincidence, Guo, who later became the president of Chinese Academy of Sciences in the People's Republic of China, Guo lived in the neighborhood of Sugihara's home in the 1930s. And because of this, he was invited to visit archaeological sites in the mainland China in 1957, when Japan and the People's Republic of China didn't have a diplomatic relationship. In the same year, Sugihara attended the 5th International Congress of Quaternary Research held in Madrid, Spain. And at the conference, Sugihara met James Bennett Griffin, then the director of the Museum of Anthropology at the University of Michigan. And apparently they are very happy with each other. And Griffin agreed to conduct carbon-14 dating of samples Sugihara excavated at the Natsushima Shell Maiden site in Yokosuka, within the US Naval Base at Yokosuka in 1955. And since then, Sugihara and Griffin exchanged letters frequently, and letters which Sugihara sent to Griffin, and carbon copies of letters Griffin sent to Sugihara are all kept in the Bentley Library of the University of Michigan. Some of the contents are very funny, but I will tell you this. Sugihara became very good friend with Griffin in 1957, and he started to prepare for the expedition in 1959. But it was basically Oka who really designed the whole thing. Meiji University Expedition to Alaska was conducted. Meiji University dispatched the expedition to Alaska in 1960 in celebration of the 80th anniversary of the Meiji University. It was interdisciplinary in nature, in geography, ethnology, and archaeology, and geography team reached the summit of Mount Denali in 1960. And the choice of Alaska was by Oka Masao, who had been interested in the cultures of northern frontier since the 1930s. And results of this expedition was published in 1961. I'm showing a cover jacket of this publication, numerous photographs and 180 pages. But most of 180 pages were written by Oka Masao himself. And unfortunately, to my embarrassment, only 20 pages were devoted to archaeology. And first expedition took place in 1960. Meiji dispatched additional expeditions to Alaska in 1962 and 1967, headed by Oka Masao, but archaeologists didn't participate in them. 1960, and I really want to emphasize, how meaningful or amazing at that time, because Japan in 1960, that only 15 years after Japan lost the Second World War, Japan was very poor. The first expedition was financed of course, by the university, as well as Toei Cinema Company and the Yomiuri newspapers. And at that time, $1 equal to 360 yen, which means $100 US dollars equal to 3 months salary of starting businessman who had just graduated from a 4-year college. I know this because among the letters Griffin and Sugihara exchanged in 1959, apparently radiocarbon dating, three samples of, 2 oyster shells and 1 charcoal would have cost $300, which is like a 9 months salary of beginning businessman in 1959. And Sugihara, of course, couldn't afford it and sent a letter to Griffin saying Sugihara would donate sample of Jomon pottery to the Museum of Anthropology and beautiful flower vase to him and to physics professor who conducted radiocarbon dating and asked Griffin to cancel the bill, and Griffin did. But anyway, that shows how poor Japan was in 1960. And at that time, Meiji ventured an expedition to Alaska. Because Sugihara didn't have any prior knowledge or prior knowledge about prehistoric North America or prior exposure to North American archaeology, excavation was conducted in cooperation with the University of Wisconsin. Japanese members, Sugihara himself, Professor Tozawa Mitsunori, who later became the president of the Meiji University, and Professor Okada Hiroaki, the husband of Professor Okada Atsuko, who is here with us today. And Professor Okada Hiroaki later became Professor of Cultural Anthropology at Hokkaido University, Northern Island of Japan. Wisconsin member, Professor Harumi Befu, who is still active, 92 years old, still active. Prof is a professor emeritus at Stanford University. So here's a photograph of archaeology team. Professor Befu, Harumi Befu here, and Professor Tozawa later became the president of the university. Professor Professor Okada, and then Sugihara Sosuke, the head of the team, and others field assistants, like undergraduate students in College of Engineering at Meiji. I've already mentioned this. And Professor Okada Hiroaki was introduced to archaeologists at Meiji University by Professor Okada Atsuko, then the curatorial assistant at the Meiji University Museum of Archaeology in the 1950s. Field assistant, Professor Okada, Professor Sugihara, Professor Befu, and photo by Tozawa. Anyway. Background to it is that Professor Befu entered a doctoral program at Wisconsin in September 1959 and became a liaison between Chester Chad and Chester Chad and Sugihara Sosuke. And prior to his return to the United States, Befu studied anthropology at the University of Tokyo from January to August. At that time, Professor Okada Hiroaki was one of the classmates. And Befu was introduced to archaeologists at Meiji by Professor Okada Atsuko, Professor Okada's wife. And I made a mistake. Okada Hiroaki it was Oka Masao who introduced Okada Hiroaki to Sugihara. So Sugihara, it was really Oka who really made a contribution to the archaeology team as well, because Professor Okada Hiroaki really played a major role in the fieldwork in 1960. Because Sugihara had no previous exposure to North American archaeology, prior to the fieldwork, Sugihara met many prominent archaeologists in North America. So of course, because it was incorporated, the fieldwork was collaborative, was done in cooperation with Wisconsin. So first he flew to Wisconsin-Madison. The fieldwork took place from June 17th to July 13th in 1960. So prior to the fieldwork, Sugihara first, first I flew to San Francisco and then to Wisconsin and met Professor Chester Chard, Hadumi Befu, and William Laughlin on May 23rd, 24th. And then he went to Chicago, met Donald Collins then the Field Museum of Field Museum of Chicago, and Arthur Generick at University of Chicago, and then went to Detroit and Ann Arbor, Michigan, and met Griffin and Richard Beardsley, cultural anthropologist specializing in Japan. And then he flew to Washington, D.C. and met Henry Collins at Smithsonian, and then went to Philadelphia and met Robert Eckermann at the University of Pennsylvania, and then went to New York and met J.B. Bird, Gordon Ekholm, and James A. Ford at American Museum of Natural History, and then finally went to Harvard and met Philip E.L. Smith. Philip Smith's wife is Japanese, Fumiko Ikawa Smith. And then also met Clyde Clackhorn, probably Oka's introduction, and Edwin Reicherer, who later, after that, who became American ambassador to Japan. Anyway, so he met these people, and Eckermann at Pennsylvania, James Ford at American Museum of Natural History had previous experiences in excavating, excavating archaeological sites in Alaska. So I'm sure Sugihara gained quite a bit of knowledge about Alaska from them. Then Sugihara flew to Alaska. The site, hot spring site they excavated, it is located in here, 700 kilometers from Anchorage. And the site is located on the shore of Port Moller Bay, and from the shore, actually, like 1,000 meter long sandbar extending from the shore of Port Moller, and the shell midden is located on the sandbar. It's a sandbar. Meiji University's, okay, this is a site map. Meiji University placed a long 40-meter trench here. University of Wisconsin placed a trench here at that time. These are the trenches excavated by Professors Okada and Okada later. Anyway, here's a photograph of trench excavated by Meiji University, 40-meter long, and excavated through like 3 heaps of shells. And shells like accumulated, shell midden is 400 meter by 400 meter, and shells are accumulated 2 meters in thickness. 400 meters per side, 2 meters in thickness. Radiocarbon dates from the lowest stratum, like 2,680 pp or 2,960 pp. These are not calibrated by dendrochronology. So must be a little bit older than this, before pottery was adapted in this region. Tozawa wrote in a very short preliminary report, just excavating for 30 minutes resulted in the discovery of a bucket full of shells bivalves. And in the assemblages of, in accumulation of bivalves, archaeologists discover fish bones, bird bones, animal bones, lithics, and bone and antler tools. And also they discovered burial, human burial, a couple of human burials as well. These are the representative bone and antler tools. This one, spear point hafted into a shaft, multiple hooks not to release the catch, and these are tied these are tied to a rope, no pottery at all. Altogether, Meiji University archaeologists brought back some 300 bone and antler tools. They also brought back some 200 stone tools. Most of them are basalt, like spear points, arrowheads, and also I learned for the first time, Eskimo knife for women and Eskimo knife for men, because Inuit people still use knives of the same morphology even now, and that's the reason why they can distinguish this is for women, this is for men. And accessories, bone and accessories, I think this is labret as well. Shells, 90% of shells are cockle shells, bivalve. Cockle shells are Fulvia mutica, M-U-T-I-C-A, Fulvia, F-U-L-V-I-A, and mutica, M-U-T-I-C-A. And some other bivalves are blue mussels and small number of small conches, sea urchins. And land mammals includes caribous, bears, and foxes. Marine mammals include seals, walruses, and sea lions, whales, and birds include geese, wild ducks, and fish includes salmon and trouts. And also, I have to ask specialists of Alaskan archaeology what this is. Clay vessel installed to the ground. Before the appearance of pottery, they used such a vessel. I mean, not fired, but clay, and installed to the ground. I mean, adapted to the ground. And I said, some 200 lithics and some 300 bones and antler tools were brought back to Japan, to Meiji, and no shells were brought back. To my embarrassment, I feel very bad about this. The site report was never published, remained unpublished. And Professor Yamauchi and myself have applied to the Meiji University for a grant to cover the cost of analyzing stone tools and the bone antler tools this year. I really hope I will get it, but I really feel embarrassed. These are how lithics are stored right now. When I took these memorandum photos, I didn't have scale with me, and this was included in my notebook. So this is for scale. Most of them are basalt, and there are some polished stone axes like this. And these are like bone accessories and bone tools, probably harpoon head. Probably this is a bone accessory, and these are harpoon heads. So there are 300 of these. As I said, Meiji University dispatched expeditions to Alaska in 1962 and 67, but archaeologists did not participate in them. Professor Okada Hiroaki did participate as an ethnologist, as an assistant to Professor Oka Masao, as an assistant, and it continued excavations at the hot springs site was conducted by Professors Okada Hiroaki and Okada Atsuko in 1972, 74, 77, and they published results of their fieldworks in the 1970s. This is a cover of second season, cover of the report of second season. And I feel very, very bad, sorry, about the fact that my senior colleague, Sugihara Tozawa, didn't publish, they died without publishing side reports. I feel very bad. And I really want to publish side reports in English in the near future. And also another thing I feel bad, I regret, is that Sugihara, who was very good at foreign languages, did not introduce the works of James Bennett Griffin and James A. Ford to Japanese archaeology. I think their methodologies were shared, major aspects of their methodologies are shared by Japanese archaeologists. If I feel very bad, sorry, because if the works of Griffin and Ford had been introduced to Japanese archaeology in Japanese in the late 1960s, the thing is that I don't know, since that, I don't know when, but Japanese archaeologists had very negative feeling against American archaeology in the late 1960s and 70s. And because I studied at Michigan and at Harvard, when I returned to Japan, for summer vacation in the 1980s, and when I returned to Japan in 1990 to start my dissertation research, many Japanese archaeologists didn't like me at all. The thing is that if Sugihara, who was very good at foreign languages, I really wish that he should have introduced Griffins and Ford's methodologies to Japanese archaeology, but probably that's the work I should do in the near future as well, because I'm hoping to write a book on history of American archaeology in Japanese, maybe when I retire or something. But anyway, so that's it for today. The thing is that, well, I have to say I'm sorry many, many times, because we have not published the reports. And I really promise I will do that in the near future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for your talk. It's like wanna maybe now move on to the question and
yeah, please.
Yeah. Take the.
The thing is that I am not a specialist of Alaskan prehistory, so what I have to do is that really we have to publish all the results, publish illustrations of all the lithics and bone and anthropoids, and get suggestions from American colleagues specializing in Alaskan archaeology. I think that's the thing I have to do. And probably I should ask Professor Okada Atsuko if I have made any mistakes.
Yes.
I did my best. 岡田先生、私、間違ったこと言ってませんかね？
あ、大丈夫。
大丈夫。あ、よかった、よかった。
大丈夫ですか？
She says, okay, good.
Okay. Paul, you have a
Oh,
question?
oh, sure. Although if we're going to hear from Professor Agado, she should speak first in Japanese, of course.
岡田先生、ミュートなんですよ。
ミュート、ミュート。
ミュート外していただかないと。
She has to unmute. I'm sorry.
Toru, can you unmute her?
From my side, I can ask her to unmute, but.
Oh, okay, good, good. Hi.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Hi.
Thank you very much, Professor Sasaki. I'm very glad to talk about at Hot Spring village site. May I speak in Japanese?
Please.
Yes, please, please.
何を話しましょうかね。
いや、私なんか間違ってません？
いえ、佐々木先生のお話は一つも間違っていませんでした。
ありがとうございます。安心いたしました。
ただ、私はその後、この遺跡の調査を続けたということをちょっと、話したいと思います。
はい、ぜひ。
よろしいでしょうか。
はい。
1972年から1984年まで、はい、私たちは6回のシーズン発掘をいたしました。それで5冊の報告書といいますかブリーフ、スタディですけれども出させていただきました。それはイングリッシュで書いておりますので、ぜひお読みいただければ嬉しいと思います。
I'll translate them. So Professor Okada, what she just mentioned is there's no mistake with what Ken just presented, but there's a kind of follow-up here. Is after this, the contents in the expedition in the 60s.
山田先生。
はい。
なんか皆さん山田先生の声聞き取れてますかね。ちょっと小さいような気がするんですが。
ちょっと待ってくださいね。
いや、あるいは。いや、これ昨日も山田先生の
声聞こえなかった。聞こえますか？
聞こえる。
すみません。
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Sorry, it was a microphone setting for.
Yeah, that's good now.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, I'll translate. Sorry, I'll go back to this. So there's no mistake in Ken's presentation, according to Professor Okada. But there's what she just mentioned is like the follow-up after the contents of this presentation. So between 1972 and 1984. She and her groups conducted 6-time archaeological expedition to the same site in Point Hope. And then they published about 5 sites report in English, and which is available. So like we would like to, if you have a chance, she would like you guys to read it. Yeah.
Sasaki Sensei, could you stop sharing screen so we could see the speakers?
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
岡田先生どうでしょう。すみません。また続けて
何か他に。
何かご質問があればお答えいたします。
Okay.
If there are any questions, like we can ask
you have
her
questions
too.
Professor Okada, please.
Yeah.
It is really honor to have her with us, really.
Yes, I agree.
ちょっとよくわからなかったんですけど。
はい。
八木沼さん。
八木沼さんを見るから。Okay. If you have questions about ethnology side of Meiji University's expedition, probably Professor Yaginuma can respond.
プロフェッサー Okada Atsuko will speak something.
Not
Okay.
now.
Can I start? So
Please.
I have one question because so can I see again the seat slide, the history of the expedition?
Correct.
I think third expedition headed by Gamo and
Sorry.
Dr.
Okay.
Oka expedition, I think.
So hold on.これ違う。これ違う。これ違う。ちょっと待って、これ違う。いや、まだまだ、これじゃない、これかなあ、違う。
So final line, the Dr. Oka.
Okay, this one.
これ
No.
いや、違う。あ、でもこれ、違うの。もうちょっと前。どれだったっけな。
ベフ先生の写真の、あとアラスカの表紙の後のやつ。
これ違うでしょ。
もっと上です。
もっと上です。
12じゃないですか、12。Probably.
そう、これですね。はい。Subsequent ethnological expeditions in 1962 and 67 conducted by Oka ではなくて、ガモ先生。
So third expedition in 1969 headed by Gamo.
67, 69.
Yeah, 67.
67, okay.
67, yeah. Third expedition
was conducted by Professor Gamo, Professor of Cultural Anthropology at Meiji University.
Headed by Gamo, and I think Dr. Oka joined this expedition.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Professor Sasaki and Professor Okada also. And I really, this is a question for both of you. But first, I really want to say there is no need whatsoever to apologize. For the fact that
I feel really bad.
No, it's quite the opposite. We commend you for bringing this legacy collection to our attention. Remember that several of us here are stuck with legacy collections from the 1890s, 1910s, much earlier, never published. And we're trying to publish them now and going back and finding bits and scraps of paper. So what you have done with your careful organization that I saw, looking at the data that is there, you know, that's really very, very commendable and certainly nothing to apologize for. I do have a question, and maybe Professor Okada can answer, or yourself. You know, there seems to be in the background of all of this the figure of Professor Oka Masao, is a great figure in ethnology. We know that some of his interests were trying to find sort of the connections around the Pacific for the origins of the ethnic groups, Koreans, Japanese, Chinese. And Alaska might have been important to understand, you know, the origins of the peoples of the region. And this is often the case. We find people left great legacy collections which were collected for purposes of trying to understand something that is abandoned a long time ago. But the collections now have other uses. And I'm wondering if you can kind of let us know if this topic, ethnogenesis, we can say, was kind of underlying this particular focus for an anniversary expedition. I mean, it's a big anniversary. You pick one topic. Why this one? Maybe it had to do with the genesis of the people of Japan and Korea and so on.
どうしよう。これ、岡田先生と柳沼先生、ちょっと日本語でお話して、日本語でお答えいただいた方がいいですかね、山田先生。
そうでしょうね、おそらく。質問、どうしよう。翻訳した方がいいですかね、一回。
いや、他の方からもしかしたらあるかもしれない。
ポールのテイラー先生の方からの質問というのは、まず一番最初にですね、佐々木先生が これ謝りながら発表だったんですけども、スミソニアンの方でももちろん昔からある収蔵物っていうのは1890年とかたくさんあって、でその中でこういろいろこう謝る必要はないよっていうふうに言ってくださったんですけども、そこの中でですね、まずこの調査団、人類学の方もそうですし、考古学もそうなんですけども、その背景にあるのが、まず一番最初、岡正夫先生がまず背景にあって、で特に彼の、要するに関心事であった、ある意味その地域のあれですね、ある民族的背景とか、そういうところもあって、である意味エスノジェネシスって英語ではなりますけども、それがこのある意味調査団の背景にあったことだったんでしょうか、それともどうだったんでしょうかっていうのが質問です。でおそらく岡田先生と八木沼さんあたり
の方が
答えられる。
八木沼さんがちゃんと調べていらっしゃるから、八木沼さんにお話しいただく方がいいと思います。
はい。じゃあ八木沼さん。
八木沼さんすいません。The Professor Yaginuma will respond to the question.
岡田先生、そんなこと全然ないんですけれどもじゃあ日本語でよろしいでしょうか。微妙なところ岡先生はですね、ドクター論文を書いたときには北方からの文化についてこれから研究が重要だと書いてあると言うんですね、ドクター論文に。で、その後、北方の方の調査をやりつつ、アラスカに到達したということで、北の流れっていうのが、なんて言うんでしょうか、日本への直接的な流れっていうのが、読み取れずに終わったのではないかなっていう気がしますこれは感想ですそれよりもドクター岡はアラスカのネイティブな方々の民族とか文化に興味が移っていったというふうに言えると思います。
All right, let me translate. So, Dr. Oka, like his doctoral dissertation from that time, in his doctoral dissertation, he mentioned that that there are more research to be done about northern Japan and also the importance about the research in connection to relation to Japan. So that's exactly that what Dr. Taylor mentioned. His interest. However, as he conducted his research from northern Japan to Alaska, he actually couldn't get into what he was initially interested in, but his interest more shifted to the people in Alaska rather than try to finding out the theorizing about ethnogenesis with Japan or region. Yeah, so couldn't really ended up what he initially was thinking about.
May I ask a question?
Please.
All right.
Yes, that will be a follow-up question. I have actually two questions. One which is follow-up on Dr. Taylor's question. That is, if there was any evidence of other ethnic groups. So there's more, I would say, specific question. If there was, looking at that type of artifacts, if there was any evidence of other groups besides Eskimos. And the other question is even more detailed. I was wondering why there is a difference in knives, one for women, one for men. Is that something to do with the way both genders are handling the knives, or there's a different reason behind it? That was very interesting for me to see how differently they were shaped. If there is any underlying, I would say, reason for that. Thank you.
Archaeology is not good at responding to questions, answering questions of how and why. Probably we really have to ask, about the gender differences in the morphologies of knives. We have to really ask indigenous people themselves, I really think. And archaeologists only excavated the hot spring site. So Japanese archaeologists, haven't discovered any like cultural differences, I mean, in terms of material culture within Alaska. So again, we have to ask specialists of Alaskan archaeology about it. But the thing is that, to my embarrassment, I haven't read ethnology section of that thick report. And probably Professor Yaginuma has better knowledge. Ethnology team of Meiji University may have discovered, regional cultural differences within Alaska, because they traveled for long distances within Alaska to the inland. 八木沼先生八木沼先生、
はい、
どうですか？だから岡先生と蒲生先生はいろいろこうアナクトブックパスとかいろいろ行かれてですね、このアラスカの中で先住民の文化の地域的差異とかは言語学的差異とかは見つけられたんですかね？
ですね、あの頃は言語的な差異というよりも、なんていうんでしょうかね、インディジニアストラディショナルなカルチャーを抑えようという伝統的なカルチャーを調査しようということにフォーカスされたと思います。ただ言語学の宮岡先生がいらっしゃったおかげで南西アラスカの人々のことはイヌイットとは言わずにユピックっていう自分たちのことをですね、ユピックって言いますし、ノースアラスカの方もイヌイットとは言わずにイヌピアクって言うんですね。で、そういう言語が方言以上に違うらしいですね。っていうところなんですけれども、それと同時にそれは後々随分意識されてきたと思うんですね。ただ最初の調査の頃はその第二次調査にインテンシブ調査をフォーカスある地域にしてやることになったんですけれども、その時は制御の違い、環境の違いっていうのを重視してインランドエスキモ、それからシーマーマルハンターエスキモ、それからフィッシングエスキモ、南西アラスカのフィッシングエスキモっていう3つにフォーカスをして調査をしていったということだったように抑えております。
山田先生、私、英語にしましょう。英語にしましょうか。
じゃあ、すみません。
Okay. The major purpose of ethnological expeditions to Alaska in the 1960s was to see regional differences in subsistence economies in islands, continental seashores, and inlands, that is, inland hunters and seashore hunters of marine mammals, and fishery in islands. That was pretty much it. And they didn't, they really focused on these 3 regions, and that's pretty much it. At the same time, a linguist joined one of the expeditions, and he noticed linguistic differences among culture in southwestern Alaska, such as Port Muller, and also inland Alaska and northern Alaska. The difference is more than dialects. Like southwestern Alaskan indigenous people call themselves Yupik, not Inuit, and northern Alaskan people called themselves a different name.
Inupiaq.
Inupiaq, sorry.
So if I brief in linguistically, so West South Alaska, they people speak Yupik language, and North Alaska speak Inupiaq language. Inupiaq language is similar to from North Alaska to Greenland. So North Alaska people can speak and talk each other with Greenland Eskimo. And at the time of 1960s, member of the expedition didn't focus this linguistical difference. At the time, so at the first expedition, they surveyed thoroughly from all over the Alaskan Peninsula. And in the time of the second expedition, so they focused inland Eskimo in North Alaska, and second is sea mammal hunting Eskimo, and third is fishing southwestern Eskimo, Yupik. 3 types of the subsistence difference. すみません。
はい、ありがとうございます。
拙いも英語で申し訳ございません。
いや、ありがとうございます、本当に。ちゃんと通じてます。
It's kind of, to me, like, I don't know, it's kind of one of the, probably kind of Japanese version of one of the good side and also like a difficulty with holistic anthropological research, you know, like archaeology, linguistic anthropology, cultural anthropology, timeline is different, but try to work together to, you know, do research.
Right.
Yeah.
It just seems to me also that you've presented another case that's comparable to some of the people who in our past webinars, like Rob Pensions talks about the legacy collections we have here from Japan, some of which were, you know, sort of unidentified in the collection and never published. And these are inherently the kinds of collections that is a very good idea to sort of collaboratively work on and publish.
Yes.
And there's a real opportunity here. I do think that this webinar, and we, you know, those listening should refer to it. It will be posted on YouTube, so
indeed,
much later. And I do think that this is an opportunity for people interested in this kind of subject to reach out to our professors here, Professor Sasaki and Professor Yamada at Meiji University, and suggest you know, opportunities for input of various kinds if you're working with Alaskan archaeology or other areas where Meiji University has done research around the world. There's probably a lot of good opportunities for cooperation between the archaeologists and the ethnologists in our two countries. Sounds like a closing statement, but actually I meant to say it as a comment.
Sounds like a closing statement. Well, it is it is a good time, but wonderful.
I don't want to discourage anybody else's question now, but just a comment.
そうですね、今ちょっと翻訳するんですけども、このセミナーの中でですね、今参加している企画の中にも関わってくださっているスミソニア側の方のロバート・ポンシオンさんなんかの調査ですと、ある意味こうレガシーコレクションといって昔からあるある倉庫の方に保存されているものっていうのをこう分析して、で彼の場合だと日本に関わることを分析されているんですけども、特にこういうものを、今明治ではアラスカのものが置いてあるんですけども、やはりこういうものの調査っていうのは、こういう形で共同研究、共同分析を、あれですね、組織公で進めていくことができると、とても実りのあるものになるんじゃないかということです。で、なのでね、今回、特にこれは私はその後私のコメントになってしまうんですけども、このコロナの中になって、ある意味、こうやってオンラインになって難しくなってきたんですけども、同時にこれが 可能性になってきたっていうのもあって、今まで Zoom でこういうことってなかったですよね。で、こう YouTube とかにこうやってビデオを載せたりすることができて、で、またいろんな人にこう見ていただいて、連携ができるっていうのは、ある意味コロナでプラスだったことで、これからまた対面がいろんな形で戻ってくる形でできるかなっていうのが可能性かなと思ってます。So I kind of added a comment to Paul's. So one of the thing about it is like right now is, we couldn't travel for last little more than 2 years. However, in terms of global research, actually pandemic brought us a lot of new tools. I mean, Zoom, we never done it before pandemic.
Sure.
Yeah, then like really connecting us really like broadly and share like ideas and information and also connection to give us. Now it's like, gradually kind of back to more like back to like travel and the face-to-face, but still, using this kind of like a hybrid way really give us more opportunity about research collaboration.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Easier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
ちょっと質問がある。
はい。
はい。
Thank you. Thank you again so much for your talk, Professor Sasaki. Could you clarify one thing? As I understood it, while at least the earliest expedition was going on, the Meiji Expedition 1960, there was concurrently a U.S. university-led expedition in the same area. Right. Is that correct? University of Wisconsin, I think.
That's correct. Concurrently, Meiji and Wisconsin excavated different portions of the same site.
Okay, so yeah, my question, and perhaps Professor Okada Sensei, maybe she has something that some insight on this. I was wondering about, and speaking of collaborations and overseas collaborations between universities and museums in Japan and United States, I was wondering about the communication or exchange between the Japanese side and the U.S. led expedition, during the 1960 Alaskan excavations. If there was much, interchange between the two or communication, or maybe not much, I was just curious about that.
岡田先生にちょっと聞いてみないと、明治大学の1960年以降のその日本のだから弘明先生、敦子先生の調査とそのアメリカの側とのそのなんていうかコミュニケーション、アメリカの研究機関とのコミュニケーションはどれくらいあったんですか？
アラスカですから、
はい、
アラスカ大学、
はい、
私たちのたくさんの友人がアラスカ考古学をやっています。ウィスコンシンにいた時のウィスコンシン時代の友人がアラスカ考古学をやっておりまして、そういう方がアンカレッジとかフェアバンクスにいて、私たちは行くたびにその方たちにお世話になり、そしてまたその方たちが日本に来ると、私どもと一緒にいつもアラスカ考古学のことについて話し合うということが行われてまいりましたので、そんなことでいいんでしょうか。
Okay. Robert, you can understand Japanese. The thing is that
yes.
First of all, the University of Alaska was the major partner. The thing is that Professors Okada and Okada studied also did research. Studied at Wisconsin in the early 1960s, and there they made lots of friends. American friends specializing in Alaskan archaeology. So every time Professors Okada and Okada conducted a field work in Alaska, their friends from Wisconsin assisted them greatly in Alaska.
Yeah.
なるほど。
で、彼らはアラスカの大学やアラスカの考古学調査部門に勤めていましたから、そういう方たちと、ずっと行くたびにもう本当に荷物は預かってもらうし、何でもしていただいていました。
So, like graduates of American graduates of Wisconsin worked in Alaska, and these people helped them greatly. and like a stored luggage of Professors Okada and Okada, and
Yes.
also wonderful.
So this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you so much again to Meiji University. This is a real opportunity to maybe recontact people at the University of Wisconsin and indigenous people in Alaska and other things, or other areas, as we all wish you all the very best on your plan to publish this information, which,
indeed, yes.
which will be done, I'm sure, much faster than we are going to be able to publish some of our old collections from the 1890s, 1910s, and so on. Thank you so much to Hidako also for joining us and for all of you.
So, shall we close?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Is there, so like, yeah, we will post the video in a few weeks, and then like, will you send everybody the link to the website, and also the link to the other previous seminars, right? Yeah. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and I say this evening in the US, and wherever you are. Yeah, then I'd like to, like whenever we come up with another new project, we'll send you invitation email again.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.